and thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Even though this is recorded and not live, this will be a very interactive process, and I want us to engage and talk to each other in the chat. So to get you all engaged, I'm going to be asking some follow-up questions and assigning tasks throughout. So before we get started, make sure that you have a pen and a pad available to you. So if not, pause this video, go ahead, grab something to write with so that you can take some notes. I'll wait. All right, so welcome back. The first thing that I want you to write on your pad is the one thing you want to get out of today's workshop. Let's take a moment, write it down, and then let's focus on that intention today. For me, I want you all to learn something new that you didn't know before, and I want to be able to provide you with an interactive and engaging session today. So with that in mind, let's get started on what the lesson will be today. This is a beginner session on grant writing. In the session today, we will focus on the following 5 fundamental areas. What is a grant? Why grant writing? Who gives money and why? The steps in the grant writing process, and then the basic elements of a grant proposal. And those basic elements will also be broken down in a few steps for you. After today, if you find that you do want to move beyond the basics, click that link above to see what else I have in store for you. All right, so I've been doing a lot of talking and you all know nothing about me yet. So my name is Shana Scott, and I'm the founder and chief strategy officer of Consult with Shana, which is how you probably found out about this workshop. What I do with Consult with Shana is I work with executives, leaders, nonprofits, etc., to help them figure out what their business goals and business ideas are and move those goals to the next step. When I first started working with Consult with Shana, I worked with a lot of new grads and young professionals, and I still enjoy doing that. And I have a nonprofit that I'll be starting where I'll be working with the young professionals to really help them transition into the work world. But with Consult with Shana, it's more for established businesses or if you intend to move a business forward. And I love writing grants, I love researching, I love policy. And so in that space, I'm also the compliance director for a healthcare company, as well as I serve as an assistant professor of health policy with the University of Georgia. And so my grant writing chops really got built when I worked in government, in local government, state government, and also the federal government. I was most recently at the Georgia Department of Public Health, where in that capacity between 2017 and 2020, I helped the teams amass almost $7 million in federal funding. So I really like being in spaces where I can build teams, build processes, and help generate funds so that interventions and work can move forward. And then from a nonprofit perspective, I sit on a couple nonprofit boards right now. The first one is the American Diabetes Association, the Georgia chapter. And then I also recently came off of the board as chair-elect for the National Association of Chronic Disease Directors, where I worked with the Diabetes Council. So that's just a little bit about me and understanding where I'm coming from a grant writing perspective. Having written some grants and then sat on review committees, I really have a lot of information that I really do want to share with those that may have had a hard time figuring out how to get with a grant or how to apply, what does the terminology mean, and really how to get started. And so this is what this session will be about, helping you get started with that process. So I'm going to turn off my camera for a moment just to really focus on the words on the screen and get us to really dig in and dig deep into some of these concepts. Then I'll pop back on to ask some questions again. So, what is a grant and why are we talking about grants? Why do we need grants? So, a grant is what we call in the grant writing world as a conditional gift of funds, no strings attached. So, it is a gift. It doesn't have to be repaid. You don't have to give it back. There isn't a time period to send money back, etc. It's conditional, meaning that there are terms attached. It is a gift, no strings attached. Grants give you the opportunity to address a need that you may have identified. So, with your nonprofit, with your business, you may be in a specific space, whether it's fashion, whether it's art, whether it's design, whether it is leadership. That is your space, real estate, etc. That is your need that you have identified that needs to be filled in the public. And grants offer that opportunity for that need to be identified by both you and then a founder or a funder who has an area of concern. Grants are given out by many different types of organizations: the government, departments within governments, corporations, foundations, nonprofits also give out grants. Some businesses have the capacity to award grants, and also individuals. So mainly when we hear about grants, right, we hear about the federal government giving out grants, and that's probably what attracted many of you here, because you hear that the federal government is giving out free money, you want to be a part of that process. And I'm here to talk about that process in some basic elements. So yes, the federal government and the state government also gives out money. When you hear me talking today, when I'm referring to the government and government grants, I'm mainly speaking about the federal government. When I'll be speaking about state governments, I'll mainly speak in terms of contracts or procurement, and I'll define what those terms mean later on. So grants give you an opportunity to address a need, right? As I stated, that's been identified by both yourself and the funder as a concern that needs to be addressed. So over the next couple slides, this one and the following, I'll be looking at different types of funders out there. Note that at the federal and state level, it does get a little bit more complicated because the federal government may use certain terminologies, and their grants are also divided into different categories as well. But that's okay. Federal and state governments offer 4 types of grant funding. Hopefully you'll start writing these down: competitive funding, formula funding, continuation funding, and pass-through funding. So when I applied for grants at the federal government, many of the grants that I applied for were competitive and then continuation. And so I'll explain those two. Competitive means that they've put an RFP out, which I'll explain what an RFP is in a couple more slides. They've put an RFP out and they have determined these are the types of organizations that are eligible. So a nonprofit, a school, a business, a for-profit, etc. A state, those are eligibility categories, right? And so anyone who falls in that category can compete to apply for that funding. So that's what it means to say competitive. They'll put it out and everyone is competing to win. That application may say they're awarding 30 or 60 or 100 or 10 or 5. What they'll do, hundreds of people may apply. Now you're all competitively trying to be in that 5, in that 30, in that 60. The other type of funding I mentioned was continuation funding. So now let's say you've successfully competed, you are one of the 5. When the government noted that this grant was going to be there, they may say this award is for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, etc. Well, in order to get your dollars again, year 2, year 3, year 5, you are now doing a continuation application. Okay? So those are the 2 main ways that the federal government funds: competitively and continuation. Formula funding is out there, but that's mainly for state governments, as well as pass-through funding. but for what you all may be eligible for, competitive, and continuation. If you plan to apply for federal government funding, I do have a follow-up workshop. Again, you can click to the right above, and we can learn and go into very specific details about what the federal government is looking for. Looking at private foundations and corporations, why do they give out money? So a foundation may give out money because they have received dollars from the federal government. So your state may have several foundations and they will give out dollars to help achieve mission critical activities. So they may have a mission to feed children or to educate women, and they need help doing that work. And so foundations award dollars to be able to do that. Annually, foundations give out about $10 billion every year. And about 1 billion of those dollars go to universities, colleges or universities. So about $9 billion is available to nonprofits, businesses, et cetera, from a foundation perspective. What I will say about foundations is that you do need to be careful when you apply for foundation awards, because often foundations fund geographically. So you want to be sure that the foundation that you are looking for doesn't have location-specific stipulations when they post an award that they may want to send out. Corporations also give out dollars. Later in this presentation, we'll look at the Home Depot Foundation, which, right, the Home Depot is a corporation and they now have a foundation, and they give dollars to do various things in the communities as well. So those are 4 areas: federal government, state government, foundations, and corporations. Those are the 4 main areas where you should be able to find grant dollars. Okay, so now that you've narrowed it down to one of those 4 areas, what is the type of funding? So remember, I mentioned that the federal government, they do grants, right? And within their grants, they have 4 categories. So let's look at what else is out there besides a grant. So without getting into all of the details about the different types of federal grants, which again, that's a separate webinar, here are some basic details about types of funding. So we have a grant, we have a cooperative agreement, and then we have a contract. So a grant is one of the government's tools for funding ideas and projects to provide public services, stimulate the economy, and just benefit the general public. Grants can be awarded for a wide variety of activities, such as innovative research. So that's mainly like a university, right? Or scientists, et cetera. Recovery initiatives. We're in a recovery period right now, right? With COVID, we're trying to recover. And so there are many recovery initiative grants related to COVID right now, right? You all have heard about the $14 billion in COVID relief funds. Well, within that, there are going to be a lot of grant activities related to recovery that you all may qualify for. As schools reopen, et cetera, they will need assistance in that recovery process. Infrastructure building, that may also be related to recovery as well. Or any of the 100 or hundreds of other federal programs, there are many ways that the federal government give grants. A cooperative agreement is another example. It is also given out by a government agency, and it is distinguished from a grant in that it provides for substantial involvement between the federal awarding agency and the entity that is awarded. Typically, cooperative agreements can be highly specialized research awards in which the federal staff or some experts in the field will work closely with the awarded organizations, agencies, et cetera. Because the federal government is involved, cooperative agreements does take some time in the application process. And when we say cooperative agreement, right, remember when I talked about the 4 types of ways that you can apply for a federal grant. So a cooperative agreement with the federal government can also be a competitive application, meaning that many other people can compete for these. They may award 5, 10, etc. And then once you are awarded, if you are in that group, you may then have to do a continuation application. The final type of funding is a contract or a procurement. We hear contracts and procurement a lot thrown out in the streets, right? I got a government contract, I'm procuring with the government. What exactly does that mean? Contracts and procurement happens both at the federal and state level as well, or even the local government. Sometimes counties and cities have their contracting and procurement process. Procurement is a really huge business market in the United States. The government procurement process is the means by which the government acquires the goods and services that it needs by purchases from commercial businesses. So since the agencies of the government, right, they use taxpayer dollars, there are a lot of regulations from the Constitution and just our tax codes about how to use those dollars responsibly. And so in order to do so, they must draw up legal contracts with suppliers in order to proceed and do the work that they need to do. In a contract procurement process, prices may be pre-negotiated and they are based on fair market value and based on some predetermined set of terms and conditions. I hope that that is starting to make sense. So I'm going to jump back on with my camera so that we can really look at the difference between a contract and a grant. I know that was a lot, and so I know you probably have questions. So go ahead and type some things in the chat, some questions that you may have in the chat, and I'll get back to you in 24 hours. But let's break it down again in simplest terms. Contract, grant. A contract is a legal entity, right? A legal tool. So a contract involves what in legal terms we call quid pro quo. This for that. Contractors get paid only if they accomplish the requirements, which are known as the deliverables of the contract. So let's say your city, your county, their procurement process, which is a contracting process, they put a procurement out there for cleaning of all the schools. So schools are all going to try to come back in session from COVID in fall 2021, and they need deep cleaning. Your business entity has a cleaning service. You apply for a contract with your city government to procure and do this. The contract is going to be a quid pro quo, this for that. And you're only going to get paid if you accomplish those deliverables in that contract. The difference between that contract and now let's say a grant that you may have applied for, a competitive grant that you may have applied for with the federal, state, or local government, your grant will have conditions, not deliverables. Those conditions may say, well, these grant funds may be spent on certain things or certain activities. You may not spend your grant funds on certain things. You may not pay salary. You may not purchase equipment, right? So grant funds are not contingent on specific results happening. They are about the conditions that are set forth in the grants. Contracts have deliverables, grants have conditions. You won't get paid on a contract if you don't meet those deliverables. A grant, you will get paid or not paid based on the conditions. When you're writing your application, you're going to look and see what conditions that funder has laid out so that you don't put those things in your budget. You may think, right, I'm getting this grant. I want to be able to buy computers to run my business or pay for my office space. If those conditions are in the RFP, you cannot do that. You will be disqualified. So you want to be clear on what those conditions are in the grant and be clear on what those deliverables are in your contract with the government. Clear as mud? Probably not. Put a little comment in the chat and let me know what you think. I'm waiting for those comments. So while I'm waiting for your comments, back off the video again to jump into some types of grants. All right. So there are also different types of grants as well. I know, different types of contracts, different types of grants. Am I doing a competitive grant? Is it a continuation? Yes, I know. All right. So let's break it down. I'm applying for a grant with the government. It now says it's a competitive grant. Here are the types of competitive grants that you may see: research, curriculum, demonstration, training, equipment, fellowship, lab research. So for a small business, a curriculum, demonstration, or training grant will probably be most applicable. There are other types of grants that may be also geared towards nonprofits or educational institutions. And we'll take a moment, step away from the slides, and we'll look at grants.gov in a second to see some examples, okay? We're gonna break this all the way down. So we have an understanding of what a grant is, right? And who gives grants. So let's just say federal government. Federal government is a little bit more complicated, like I said. Nonprofits and foundations are a little bit simpler. When we look at nonprofits and foundations, even the federal government, what they're sending out, you have to understand the terminology. And the terminology is a big deal. We've spent 9 or so slides talking about terminology, right? One thing that I think everyone on here has heard before is the terminology RFP. If you follow my Consult with Shana page and you've been over to my consultwithshana.com website, you'll see that on Fridays, I do just an acronym breakdown, and RFP is one of the ones that I broke down recently. RFP stands for Request for Proposal. Grant makers, whether it's a foundation or a government entity, they release RFPs ahead of a grant submission deadline. It's really important that you understand the terminology. Request for proposal is what they send out when they want to communicate their needs to you all. Okay, it's just the way to communicate. Hey, nonprofit. Hey, business entity. Hey, Keisha. Hey, Valerie. Hey, Christian. We have something available in your field, in real estate, in design, in education. I want you to be aware of it. So I'm posting this RFP, guys. The RFP contains everything you need to know as an applicant. It contains everything from the submission guidelines and the deadlines to a grant maker's priorities and their contact information. They may also be details about budget specifications, required attachments that you need to send. So if you have a board, you may want to attach all of their resumes, their bio statements. It will include the response timeline and more. Each RFP is specific to the person, the entity, the organization that's putting it out there as far as how much content they will include. Okay, so RFP is one thing that you all are probably super familiar with. If you all are trying to get into the government grant writing space, you may see some other terminology. So another acronym similar to RFP is the RFA, Request for Application. It is the exact same thing as an RFP. They are requesting that you submit your application. From the government perspective, you may see NOFA or NOFO. A NOFA is a notice of funding availability. Notice of funding availability or notice of funding opportunity. And it is exactly what those words said. This is a notice that we have funding that is available to you. This is a notice that we have a funding opportunity that you may be interested in. These are all the same things. They lay out the information for you. All right, so some acronyms out the way. You are ready. You said, okay, Shana, I think I am ready to go at it. I need to get started. I have this area of work that I want to work in. I want to work with children. I want to work with moms to have them re-enter the workplace. I want to do an app. I want to work on technology. Well, where do we go? Is it a federal or should I go private? Well, the decision is really based on whether you are eligible or not. So the federal government has grants, private entity has grants, but are you eligible? So reviewing the funding opportunity announcement determines your eligibility. From a private perspective, one of the major things to consider is, again, your geographic location and then the type of project that that foundation intends to fund. So being clear on what your work is, being clear on your niche, being clear on your target audience and who you service, that is what will determine, is this the right grant? So let's not just apply for grants for the sake of applying for grants, but being clear and intentional will help you to get to the next step. So are you interested and do you have the capacity to complete the project is also very important as well. So with that said, do your homework. Scour the websites. Go to grants.gov. Get alerts set. If you live in a city, a town that uses the procurement process, go to their website. Sign up, get the RFP alerts sent to you based on your NAICS code. If you don't know what that is, your business isn't all the way together. So when you register your business as an entity with the Secretary of State in your state, you need to select a code to say, hey, I do consulting, I do project management, I do design, I do fashion, I do real estate. When you do that, you know what your codes are. You go to the federal government or the state government or your local county website, you sign up to get RFPs sent to you. You put in your codes to say, this is my space, this is my area. They will send you grants that relate. Make sense? Hopefully your business is in order. So do your homework. Doing your homework should not be taken for granted. Understanding the priorities of the funding agency is also important. One of my pet peeves with grant writing is everyone wants to get into it and they don't understand the funding agency or the funding organization and what they stand for, and they spin their wheels and they are not successful in the process. Another thing with doing your homework is reading successful proposals to that agency. Oftentimes those agencies post successful bids or successful grant applications that have won on their website. Or Google is your friend. You can Google it and it will come up. You know the saying, build it and they will come? Google it and you will find it. One of the other things in doing your homework is talking to people who have been funded by that organization, by the county, by the city, by that nonprofit before. Again, look at what they've recently awarded. They will post. So if you're looking for something in education from a foundation, let's say you're looking at the Arthur Blank Foundation or the Atlanta United Foundation. These are Georgia specific. So if you're in Georgia, those are two foundations. Look at who they funded before. Go to that website and see what work they're working on. And then don't take for granted who potential or possible reviewers of your applications will be. I've mentioned that I sit on some boards of some nonprofits and I've worked with foundations. I've been asked to be a reviewer. Here's another way to learn about how to be better at grant writing. Volunteer to be a reviewer for a nonprofit or for a foundation. They are always looking for external people to review applications. Make sure your LinkedIn is up to date and these opportunities will come your way. If you don't have access to any of that, I can help connect you with the right people in your city, in your state, to get your feet wet with some review process. So check out the reviewers, see who the reviewers are, chat with them, get their feedback, and that will also help you in the grant writing process. Make sense? Type a question in the chat for me. Let me know what you think. Is all of this making sense? So you've narrowed it down, right? You want to do a federal grant. I'm ready to take it to the big leagues. Where do we go? Grants.gov is the federal government's repository for all of the federal agencies and all of their grants and opportunities. If you want to get a little bit more specific, the Department of Education, they also have their own grant making space as well. Federalgrants.gov is a website where you can see every grant from a federal and state perspective. So these are not the exhaustive list. This is just some of my favorites that I use. Grants Alert is for all things education or community-based education grant. There are other lists that you can get on as well. One thing that I will say is do not pay to get on a list to find grants. If you start searching the internet and you come across websites or entities that's making you pay to get federal grants, to get the state grants, do not. This is free. It is available to you free of charge. Foundations and corporations also pay. I will say the Foundation Center, you need a membership to access the foundation grants. Foundation's a little bit different, right? It's like separation of church and state. So federal, we know it's the government. The government can't, will not, can't, shall not, because you pay taxes, charge you to do any of these. Foundations is a little bit differently. Some of my favorite foundations or places to get foundation grants in Georgia is fundsnetservices.com. And what that site does, it lists the Georgia and some Florida grant-making foundations. I also keep a spreadsheet list of grant-making foundations and when they fund as well. So we have talked about the websites. Let's play around a little bit. Let's see how to actually do the work on grants.gov. So we're going to take a quick moment and hop on over to two resources. We'll look at the federal, meaning grants.gov, and then we'll look at a foundation and just play around, see what it looks like. How do we get a grant and how do we search this website? So here we are over at the grants.gov website. Okay, grants.gov. You can see it up here. It has .gov in the title, so we know this is the legitimate website. You'll see their landing page, learn grants. They have a lot of information about the federal grant process, search grants, applicants. This is if you already have an application in the system and you've registered. Let me tell you a little bit about that. So grants.gov is the system for the federal government that houses over information on over 1,000 grant programs, and they also vet the grant applications from grants.gov. The website is all about federal grants. So I've applied for probably 5 grants in the last 3 years using this system. And I've been awarded over $5 million in that time using the grants.gov system, but not me personally. So that's a caveat, right? I don't have that money. I don't have that in my pocket. It's not mine. But in order to use this website, you must register, okay? You can browse and see the various grant making opportunities, but in order for you to submit an application, you must register. So grants.gov uses SAM, S-A-M, like Samantha, SAM, to establish your roles and your IDs for your electronic grant application. So SAM registration is not completed on the grants.gov website. It is completed on the SAM.gov website. And it's the System for Award Management. So once you complete your SAM registration, you must return to grants.gov to continue your registration. And again, I am doing a grant write-in, a government grant write-in workshop. And so we can go into all of those extensive details, but just wanted to reiterate that until and unless you register on SAM, you cannot submit on grants.gov. So let's take a moment and look at some grant opportunities on grants.gov. So I'm going to go here at search grants. So as we are searching, remember we talked about different types of funding, cooperative agreement, grant, other, procurement, contract, right? We talked about that. So let's look at just posted opportunities. So we'll unclick forecasted. So forecasted means that these are coming up. They're not opened yet. They're coming up and they'll be posted soon. So we only want to see posted opportunities. And remember, we talked about cooperative agreement, grants, procurement contracts, right? Remember I said the government only does these things. So we'll keep it at all funding instruments for right now. But let's look at our eligibility. You all are not a city or a township. You're not a county government. You may be a for-profit other than a small business, but that's for like a big company. So let's scroll down and see. Here we go. Nonprofits having a 501c3, nonprofits that do not have a 501c3. Here we go. Private institutions of higher education, but let's find, boom, small businesses. That's what we want, small businesses. Okay, so there are 1,067 matches for small businesses. Let's narrow it a little bit more. Let's just do a grant, 871. So now you'll see, and then you'll see these are all different types of agencies. It has categories. We will not go into that detail. Let's look at employment, labor, and training. Let's look at that. Narrow that down to 5. So you'll see the opportunity number. Remember, we talked about the NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity. So this is the opportunity number. Most often than not, the opportunity number is not a number, just FYI. So here's the opportunity number, the opportunity title, the agency that is awarding the opportunity. So at first glance, Department of State for Japan, Department of State for Japan. And I can tell, I know, because the funding opportunity is the Embassy Tokyo, the US Embassy in Tokyo. Here, this agency, HHS. I know that to be Health and Human Services. NIH, the National Institutes of Health. So same agency for these two. The opportunity has been posted. they showed the post date, they showed the close date. So these are all closing, excuse me, not all of them. Here's the synopsis of the opportunity. It's a grant. Here's the funding opportunity. Here's the title. Remember I said the government has this different type of funding categories? Here, this is discretionary. Usually discretionary funds, they're only giving out one, uno. You'll see here, expected award, 1. The CFDA, which I'll talk about that in the federal grant write-in, 93.433, meaning that every time you see that CDFA, it's going to come from the Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehab Research. You'll see the posted dates, award floor, award ceiling. They playing no games with this one. The minimum you can apply for is $494,000. The maximum you can apply for is $500,000. They're like pretty much saying, we only giving out $500,000 for this, people. Eligibility. Nonprofits having a 501c3 status. Individuals. For-profits other than small businesses. So if you have a small business, you may not necessarily fall into this category because they want you to have a certain number of people on your payroll. But if you have a nonprofit, you may also be an individual with really some strong work in disability rehab research. Now, how do we even know what the work is, Shana? You go to package. I'll click on package in 1 second. Version history just shows how many times they made changes. Related documents is usually going to be empty, so let's see. We'll take a look at this in 1 second. The package, you can preview or apply. So here, the related documents is the exact same things that's in the package here. You can see it has the full announcement, and you can open that zip file or that PDF and check out the full announcement. We won't do that today. We'll do that on the government grant write-in workshop. But this essentially just shows this is how you search grants.gov and apply for a federal opportunity. I know that was a lot, could have been a little bit intimidating. Write me some questions or comments in the chat. Send me some emojis. How do you feel? Is your mind blowing? Are you confused? Talk to me. All right, so I blew y'all minds a little bit. Let's keep it a little bit simple. Let's look at a foundation, a corporation that has a foundation. The Home Depot Foundation has 2 grant making opportunities. So we're going to swing on over to the Home Depot Foundation website and check out those opportunities. And maybe, just maybe, these may also be something that you all may be able to apply for. So here we are at the Home Depot Foundation website. So not Home Depot, but the foundation. And you can just Google Home Depot Foundation. So you can see I'm on the grants page. So if you were at the home of the foundation, you would just click on this foundation drop-down menu and you'll see they have grants. Okay? So the foundation is all about getting in community and helping community with what they call community impact grants. They also have grants for veteran and housing issues. So let's take a look at the community impact grant. So you'll see, remember I mentioned RFP, right? This isn't an RFP per se, but they are laying out everything that they want you to do here. So this is sort of like their RFP. You can see the details. It's available through December 31st. They are awarding up to $5,000 to 501c3 designated organizations that are in good standing with the IRS. And these organizations must be using the power of volunteers to improve the community. So if that is not your space, if you are not doing that, if you are not using volunteers, if you are not engaged in community work, then you would automatically not be eligible. Okay, so the types of projects that the grant opportunity supports: housing modifications and repairs for vulnerable underserved populations, veteran service organizations directly impacting the lives of veterans. Projects must empower local volunteers of all skill levels to make a lasting impact. Projects must begin within 6 to 12 weeks of the application submission, and projects that involve store associates are not eligible for community impact grants. So they go through all of that detail. They have documents that they need you to submit. They have information of when you will know if you were approved. And again, the most important thing is, how do I submit? You submit on your platform. So in order to complete the grant, you do need to log into the portal. So that really brings me to the next step and the next phase of this process. I've given you all of the basic details. I've walked us through the process. So how do we get to submitting this grant, Shana? Help me. So I like what I call these 6 steps to grant writing. I'm going to run through steps 1 and 2 really quickly, spend some time on step 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6 we'll talk about in a lot more detail. So step 1, we've talked about it before. Identify your need and create a project or program that addresses that need. So what is your niche? Step 2, identify the potential funding sources. So we've gone through that already, right? Federal, state, nonprofit, foundation, corporation, etc. Step 3 is what we've sort of done a little bit of so far, where we went to the grants.gov or the Home Depot Foundation website. But you want to carefully review the RFP and the application guidelines that will include the deadlines, the funding range, the geographical information, the application format, what is allowable, what is not allowable, who's eligible, and other criteria. Once you've done that, you need to get your grant writing team together. So who should be on your team? If you are a solo practitioner, that could just mean you are writing that grant by yourself and you are going to spend that time, or you may subcontract with a grant writer to assist with the process. If you intend to go it alone, you really need to be clear on the timelines, the process, and what to include in your application. So in this next step, you want to make sure that you have all of these common elements included. Your cover sheet. Who are you? What do you want to do? Your table of contents. Your narrative should be about 5 pages or more. Your abstract. This is brief and concise, 1 page or less. The abstract is typically what I do at the end because it helps to tie it all together. Your executive summary. So this is about your business, about your organization. That includes your mission statement, your background, etc. Problem or needs statement. So this is what the RFP is about, right? So you're talking about the problem and the need, then the goals and objectives of what you are going to implement. Your design or methodology. So how are you going to do this work? Who is going to do the work? If you are solo and you're doing a training or a curriculum, you may have to subcontract and get some other people to assist. So who are those individuals that will be helping you implement? People always forget about evaluation, but you have to talk about how you are going to evaluate and how you are going to show that this was successful. Again, this is for a grant. Procurement, you may not necessarily need to talk about evaluation, but again, you want to read the directions of your funding. Most importantly, right, we all want to get paid. So your budget and your budget narrative. So a narrative doesn't necessarily have to be a paragraph, but you want to describe the pieces in your budget. So if you are asking for $50,000 for personnel, describe who that personnel is and what they'll be doing. And then the final pieces are any resumes and the elusive letters of support. Again, nonprofits and small businesses always neglect the letters of support because you're like, well, I've never done this work before. You're asking for letters of support to prove that I know how to do this work. I'm trying to do the work. How can I get these letters of support? This is a little bit difficult, and you have to really strategize at the very beginning when you are reading the RFP to start getting those letters of support up front so that you can spend the time to write in your problem and need statement and other portions and not waste the time at the end and then you don't have any letters of support. So you've brought all of those things together. So submit. Now you must submit your grant. Sign your submission. Sign your submission. Get all of the appropriate approval signatures together, your executive director, your board, get everyone's signature, and then submit your grant on time. Better yet, submit it early. If the deadline is 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, March 25th, submit it at noon on Thursday, March 25th. Submit it the day before. Be on time, be early with your submission. And then use the process that they ask you to submit. Don't do your own thing. So if they ask for it online in their platform, in their portal, like the Home Depot Foundation, do that. Because if you don't, you may not have access to the portal. If they're asking you to mail, go ahead and mail. Usually when you mail, you do want to submit multiple copies. So make sure that you have your copies made. Email or fax, that is rare. Some do request it, but that is rare. If they do not ask for it to be emailed, do not email that proposal if their portal is closed and you found someone's email address. Do not do that. All right, so you've submitted. Now you wait. The RFP or website should indicate when to expect notification. So you've gotten the work done. See what other grant proposals are out there. Keep testing the waters to get better and better at writing. But what you don't want to do is contact the funder about the status of the notification. But what you don't want to do is contact the funder about the status until the notification dates have expired. And if they send you any communication, even if you didn't receive the funding, please reply to that notification. Thank them for reaching out. Thank them for letting them know. Ask them to keep you in mind for future RFPs so that you are on their list when they send out RFPs, but do not neglect responding to them if they communicate with you, even if you didn't receive funding. So that's it, everyone. I think that we talked a lot about just basic grant writing, and we put some foundations in place to get you all to thinking about how to write a grant, how to find an RFP, All right, guys, so we talked about a lot today. It was a pleasure. Hopefully you found all of the information relevant and accessible to you and you can use it in your future. Please don't hesitate to give me feedback about the session. Reach out, get in touch with me. You can call or text me, or you can email me or visit my website and just give me some feedback. If you want to get to the next step of the grant writing process, don't hesitate to get in touch, and I'd love to hear from you.